Well, good morning, folks. It's Tuesday morning, March 29th, and won't it be great when that's gone? I mean, March. Tom Eden, who was supposed to have checked in with us, had to go to some other appointment by 11:30, so we missed him. But we do have Ellen here with us to run over Senate Bill 704, which that's the on-farm accessory bill. And so,
Is that in here?
no.
I don't have our board in here.
You haven't got our board either. We only have our iPads and Linda.
Well, that's plenty.
I picked up a copy. You don't have any other copies?
all right.
do you,
Okay.
Linda?
I don't, but it's on today's webpage.
Oh, I have the short one for some reason.
So,
And we can share a screen if you like to.
I'm not sure why the bill got over to natural resources, I believe.
Senate Natural Resources?
House.
No, so Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel, H704 was passed by House Agriculture and Forestry and was referred to House Natural Resources.
Oh, the house, okay, so
Yeah.
it's still there?
It is still in the House.
Oh, shit, we may not even get it. Any action up
My
there?
understanding is it's at the funeral home there.
Pardon?
My understanding is it's just there for viewing.
Wow.
Funeral home.
What we may want to do then is we may do some work at 704 on a different bill.
Accessory on farm.
So why don't you run through it? We've got, 25, 30 minutes and get us up to
I
speed.
didn't bring my iPad because I was upstairs. Is there a printed copy of that? Can you do, please?
Well,
No, but we can share it. if
Yeah,
can
we
you
put on
put
the
the
screen.
language
Okay.
on the board?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll
Okay,
get right off the, yeah. Very good.
Sure,
So,
yes. And
welcome, John.
thank you. It's nice to be here. I think this is the first time I've testified in this room, and it's been quite a long time since I've testified before this committee.
Yeah.
But I
Years.
am the legislative council that handles land use, so Act 250, as well as energy law. But this bill has a lot of land use in it. There's 3 different subjects. It's fairly short, but these are a little bit complicated topics, so I'll just feel free to ask questions. And a little bit more procedural background. H704 was a short form bill that was introduced. House Ag took it off the wall and inserted the first 2 sections, which are language that came out of H581, the Rural Economic Development Bill. And so the first section is related to an exemption from Act 250 for accessory on-farm businesses. I'll go into more detail momentarily. And then section 2 makes some slight changes to the accessory on-farm business definition in Title 24. And then the third section is a section related to that states that state-owned airports do not need to pay the primary agricultural soil mitigation fee under Act 250. And I'm sure Senator Parent can fill you in on some of the background on that because he sponsored the version of that that's in the Senate. So it's combining 2 topics, accessory on-farm businesses, and then also prime ag soil mitigation for airports. So draft 2.1 of it passed out of House Ag and is now in House Natural Resources. And so I'll walk you through the language. On page 1, section 1 amends 10 VSA 6001 3D. So we're in the Act 250 definition section, and it's amending the definition of development, which means that this is creating an exemption under Act 250. And it reads, the construction of improvements.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, yes.
I was having trouble. There it is.
Yep. All right, so the exemption is for the construction of improvements for an accessory on-farm business located on a tract of land primarily devoted to farming, provided that the proposed improvements are for an accessory on-farm business as defined in 24 VSA 441211. The farming operation is subject to the required agricultural practices, and the improvements constructed for the accessory on-farm business do not physically alter more than 1 acre of land. So section 2 of the bill that we'll talk about momentarily actually is the definition of accessory on-farm business. So we can get into more what the specifics of that actually are. But currently, accessory on-farm businesses are not exempt from Act 250, so this would be exempting them. So long as the farm is subject to the RAPS and that the construction does not physically alter more than 1 acre of land.
So it reverts to the RAPs and the 1 acre of the big, 2 big stalks.
Yes, and so it's not changing any other area of law. This is just an exemption from Act 250. So it's possible they may need other permits like from A&R, but because this is going to be a commercial enterprise that's on a farm, so they may be subject to some other laws, but this is an exemption for meeting an Act 250 permit. Okay, on to page 2. So section 2 then amends the existing definition of an accessory on-farm business. Accessory on-farm business, this language was created in 2018. I was a law clerk back then, so that was my first year here, but this is a fairly recent addition to state law. And what the language in Title 24 does is it states that municipalities can't ban accessory on-farm businesses. It sets the floor for their regulation. So a town can't ban them outright in their bylaws, but they are allowed to do site plan review on an accessory on-farm business. And so this statute, most of what you're going to see on this page is laying out exactly what type of business can be an accessory on-farm business. And this language in section 2 from House Ag makes a few small changes to that definition. So first, the first change that's in this language is in the first section. So on page 2, line 2, accessory on-farm businesses. No regional plan, municipal plan, or municipal bylaw shall have the effect of prohibiting an accessory on-farm business at the same location as a farm. So as I just mentioned, the current law, it just says no municipal bylaw can ban an accessory on-farm business. And so this is adding that a regional plan and municipal plan also cannot ban accessory on-farm businesses.
But don't most municipal bylaws and plans have to meet the regional plan anyways?
Yes. And this language is a little unusual because I haven't found any other examples where things are prohibited from being in a regional plan. But this language, the request for this language did come out of a recent case related to using municipal and regional plans for Act 250 purposes. So yes, so normally bylaws have to come directly out of plan, which does have to also conform with the regional plan.
Yeah.
But the sponsor of the language, I think, was and House Ag were interested in making sure that even if a town doesn't have bylaws, but they have a town plan, or if there's a regional plan, that also those documents cannot prohibit accessory on-farm businesses.
Yep, Chris.
Ellen, how does this whole thing comes under the umbrella of an accessory on-farm business is got a I want to say there's a threshold, you can only earn, right?
It's actually all of the language for the qualifications
Yeah,
are,
okay, so-
are here, yeah.
So you can't earn more than half your income, the farm income from your on-farm accessory business,
Well,
right?
so that is part, I think, so that's not in the,
Sales.
well, so actually, that's not part of the current statute in Title 24. There are some requirements, I think, under the federal law about farming income, but currently, the only requirement is that the accessory on-farm business needs to be accessory to the farm,
Yeah,
and therefore it's been interpreted that that is subordinate to the
yeah,
farm.
sorry, so that,
Sales or income?
well, so right,
It
because
says
when we talked about this, somebody earning a big paycheck at a job who, you know, supports part of the farm. But I guess that's what I'm trying to get at is it can't be let's just call it all farm income. More than half of that can't come from the accessory on-farm business, right? That's kind of the construct.
No, actually, it's not that specific under the statute currently.
Well, you just said it has to be subordinate, so what does that mean?
Right, so that is an issue that has come up, but there isn't a definitive statement on what that means. So that's not defined.
Well, is there any universe where subordinate means superior?
So the language that I just read you on lines 2 and 4 are the sort of layout of that. The statute isn't detailed about what subordinate means. So, so as I did mention, House Natural is working on this bill. They do have testimony scheduled for it, I believe, later this week also. So they are working on it. And that is one of the issues that has come up, is whether or not subordinate needs to be defined. Because currently the word subordinate isn't actually in the statute. It just uses the word accessory.
Okay. But I guess what I'm driving at is this talks about, when you're talking about a building, construction improvement, you're talking about a point in time. Always by definition, right? Because unless you're starting to improve a building, you're basically now, this would have you create up to an acre kind of some facility.
Not very.
And which is big, it's sort of surprisingly, but under the premise, let's say it, even if it's not deeply, you know, precisely articulated, it's always been subservient to the farm. It's been a boost, not the dominant business, is I think how we've always conceived of it. And what I'd like to understand is how what happens if, you know, 2 years later, the on-farm business is gangbusters and it overcomes, you know, we've missed our time. And that just seems a little torture to me. So I'm trying to understand that thinking.
I wouldn't even require the subordinate in my way, because I think that could happen in the well-located farms. You might make more money off of the bakery of the good, you know, you might grow whatever and the bakery ends up making more money. That's fine. I think it's a good way to diversify it.
Yeah, but don't you, I mean, the bakery or the restaurant in town has to go through all manner of hoops to set up.
If we gave a downtown exemption, they wouldn't.
Well, but we do, that's the point, is, and that's where, I don't totally disagree at all, but we heard that testimony a few years ago when we were setting this up, like, you know, there is regulation on a lot of these businesses, and as soon as you put it on a farm, the request to have that lifted is, you know, people were talking about a wedding, you know, the hotel has to go through all manner of regulation to pull off a wedding, and the farm is sort of carte blanche. So I don't know, that's why now we're talking about construction. So that's where I sort of just
What I'm
got me
wondering
thinking
about is, like the cannabis,
Yeah,
small plot growers, and I think they're leaning toward letting them do starter plants in a
Yeah,
building.
yeah.
And they might have to reconstruct their building.
Yeah.
And insulate maybe part of it, and so to be able to start their plants early
Yeah.
at this time of year or even a little earlier. I
but we covered that in the 218 or whatever it was.
That, I mean, again, I didn't really think about rush. Wedding barns, I think as long as they meet the fire codes, they're good to go. And
Yeah.
most,
I don't know, to me, it's just not as simple as,
oh. There's a
anyway,
line,
I'll be curious, let's check in on my understanding.
yeah,
And so I'll also add, H581 that this language came out of, what, as introduced, did have a threshold in here saying that, the business could exceed the farm revenues as long as it didn't exceed $200,000 in sales per year, or whatever the specific, they did set a dollar amount threshold. House Ag worked on that language and took testimony on it, and they decided to take it out. So there isn't anything in here creating a concrete threshold limit in here.
Well, it's just interesting because construction is a point in time. And so you say, oh, here's my business plan, it'll be 45% of our income, therefore I'm exempt. And then, 3 years later, what? It's now 75%, and nobody goes, well, hey, I'd like to review that now. That's impossible. The building's there. We're not gonna make you take it down and start an Act 250 process.
So this bill would allow someone to construct a restaurant, a store, rooms that people could stay in on a farm stay, any of that, as long as it doesn't exceed an acre and whatever else.
right. What about that 50% though?
Well,
Provide that
So-
more than 50% of the total annual sales are from qualifying products that are produced on the farm.
well, the store, that would be pretty easy to do. You're gonna sell products from the farm. The other two, well, I guess a restaurant, if you use the same percentage of products, you'd be okay. I don't know about the farm stay though.
So farm stays are actually addressed also on page 2.
Yep.
In subdivision 2, so the second half of that page.
Right.
So farm stays are specifically allowed under the existing statute.
Okay.
The tricky thing, so stores, yes, 50% of the products, as long as they're produced on the farm, that would qualify.
Right.
Restaurants is when things get really tricky. And that, I think, has been some of the conversation around this bill. So currently, under the language that's in the statute, farm dinners or tastings are contemplated. So again, so long as 50% of the food comes from the farm. So there have been recently businesses attempting to create restaurants that are using the on-farm grown products. However, yes, at a certain point, things you serve in a restaurant that can't necessarily be grown on the farm. And so there is a recent decision from a town that said that if the restaurant could curtail itself to meet this definition, it could potentially operate as an accessory on-farm business. They do need to fall into the bounds of the 50% of the products.
I don't want to put limits, weird stuff that I see that is good business, my wife watches Magnolia Network, which is a new network, but there's literally a restaurant in Maine that has you have to get an invitation only to come in, and it only seats like 15 tables, and it only does 4 months a year dinners. You could see something like that with a highly specialized chef, like on a farm in Vermont, that becomes a real draw for these small towns. And people across the country apply to basically get a permit to come in and have dinner at these places. And I know it sounds crazy, but they have a TV show about this place, and you're going to see more and more of that stuff pop up in places that I think, especially as people look to come to Vermont, move to Vermont, they're going to.
Well, why should that be easier than the restaurant that's in town? We're not talking about you can't.
Well, I think
do
we
it.
do business too hard in Vermont. So
Well,
I just say, just
I don't
because we don't do
disagree,
it right here doesn't mean we shouldn't do it right
But-
here and then work on reducing regulation here. I don't want to regulate them because our regulations are too onerous on other people.
Well, I think you have to be cautious of a level playing field, and
Yeah.
we're not talking, Act 250 is not that onerous. Everyone hates it because they call every permit you gotta get an Act 250 permit. But this is not, you can't do that. This is whether or not you should have to apply Act 250 and, have that review. I think it's important to not pretend that we're saying yes or no to those businesses in this language.
Well, that's important, because actually what you're saying is that I could put the restaurant on, even if it's not 50% on-farm products, as long as I go through Act 250.
And most restaurants don't need to go through Act 250 because they want
The
to
way
develop.
But if they're building,
Right.
The way I
Depends where they're
see
building.
Act 250 is a decent person, which there's many of us, wouldn't do a bit, the job a bit different.
Yeah.
With the permit or without the permit, but you lose a month of time or
Some money.
more. And those permits cost you thousands of dollars combined.
It's not just the permit cost, it's the engineer to do the process for you at $200 an hour.
yeah, we have a water quality crisis, right? I get it. It's not what everybody wants. I wish we were.
I
much
don't think
more
we have a
loose,
water
but
quality issue because of Act
If there's
250.
not a water quality issue, then you don't have to pay for an engineer. It'll be an easy permit to get, right? This is the structure we have. And so, it's just an interesting question.
Yeah, I think Act 250 and other zoning laws are implicit bias within our legislation. We didn't like people moved to Vermont in the 1960s.
Well, why don't
Carbon
we
environmental side.
just mark your high spots and,
No, I'm not sure they're high spots. I'm just trying
well, I
to,
mean, questionable
Yours-
spots.
I haven't thought about this for a few years since we did it.
Sorry,
So,
well, it's good that you're thinking about it.
yeah, glad you appreciate it.
Yeah,
Sure,
well,
so,
some days I appreciate it more than others. Go ahead.
so I do want to quickly get to so there's one other change in the statute, it's on page 3. So the other, major change to the accessory on-farm business definition that's being proposed is, in the definition of farming as it's used in this context. So, middle of page 3, line 9. So the definition of farming as used for accessory on-farm business shall have the same meaning as the Act 250 definition of farming, which is the standard definition that's also used for the RAPs, except that when calculating whether an agricultural product was principally produced on the farm, water shall not be included in the calculation of an ingredient, as an ingredient. And this is language that is related to a very specific case. And it really is about whether or not the production of a beverage from agricultural products can be itself an agricultural product. So this language would allow, because currently water is counted as an ingredient, and in a beverage, it's most of the ingredient. And so since you need 50% of the sales to come from an agricultural product, in a beverage, you'll never hit that 50% threshold, except some ciders, it's really added water.
Mhm.
Apple cider, those usually pretty straight.
Right, so that, I believe there have been cider making businesses that have already gone through. This really has come up in the context of alcoholic beverages
No.
or other types of, maybe the example has been seltzer, when you're adding water to something produced on the farm to make a beverage.
What about wine? Anybody know?
Yes, so
You
that.
add water to the wine?
Potentially, if you do. So, yeah, so I actually don't know a lot about how wine is made. The House Ag did hear about beer and distilling as things that would fall under this.
So, so that water part, House Ag added that.
Yes, And so I know we only have a few more minutes. So those are the only two changes to the accessory on-farm business statute itself. And so I can walk through the rest of the language now, or I can come back if you want to hear more about it. But if you want to get to the section 3, I think it's pretty quick.
Yeah.
So on page 5, section 3. So now this is the section that's about the mitigation of primary agricultural soils. So under Act 250 currently, those who go through the Act 250 process have to address criterion 9B, which requires that if you're going to reduce or destroy primary agricultural soils, you need to mitigate them either through on-site mitigation by conserving soils, or off-site mitigation, which allows you to pay a fee that goes to VHCB, and then they conserve primary agricultural soils elsewhere. And so this language that's on page 5, it starts on line 11, and so it states that state-owned airports do not need to do any mitigation of primary agricultural soils. So,
And at the present, the state has to mitigate land that they,
yes. Yes, so, yeah, so currently anyone who goes through Act 250 has to do the mitigation if they have primary agricultural soils on their site. The only current exemption is for dense affordable housing. And so it's for affordable housing, permanently affordable housing with more than 8 units per acre. And so that is currently exempt from mitigating primary soils, but that's the only thing. Everything else does have to go through the mitigation process.
So I guess my question would be, maybe Corey knows better than I do. Well, I know you do. How many examples of prime ag land are right next to an airport right now?
All airports would have to go through this if they were to develop
Really?
their place. So like,
that sand that you got up there, that isn't prime ag.
Yeah, I mean, how
but it
can you,
still has that, we heard last year in testimony, it's about $300,000 to offset that soil there.
so that's considered prime ag land if it's sand based?
Well, here's the problem with this bill. Any open field that has any, depending on the soil types, could be prime ag. We've already said in statute, probably in the 1940s, whenever we built these airports, or 30s, this land cannot be used for anything but an airport. The FAA will not allow you to plant crops there because they got to keep deer off runways and things like that.
Yeah.
And so we're not this land has already been taken out of ag use by public policy state of Vermont. It was a loophole in Act 250 was written in my mind that they didn't think about. Like, we're not taking over land and saying it was a farm and now we're buying it out of Act 250. We're literally just saying airport land right now doesn't have to pay this fee.
So for example, Rutland just redid their runway about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, put it out so they could accept jets. They've got bigger, longer.
So anybody who wants to come in and build on your airport for like a
So they had to
business,
go through 250.
they have to go through this section of, they have to pay the, well, this will still require anybody to go through Act 250. There still have to be those. It just doesn't make them pay that mitigation fee.
Okay.
So it doesn't, in the house, the confusion was, well, we're letting these at Act 250. We're not letting them at Act 250. They still got to go through their review and do all that. They're just not paying to mitigate ag soils that aren't really ag soils anymore because they're airports.
Okay.
We've made these airports. I mean, and don't think this matters. I mean, Beta Technologies, just on WCX, I was just reading this as she was introducing, is looking to maybe not even build in Vermont because the DRB is having such an issue over parking, because in their bylaws, they got to be in the back of a building, but the back of the building is the runway. Like, this is the future of our our economy is these airports. And to me, this is just a small gesture we can make as a state to like say, yeah, we want growth on these designated areas.
You know, that's what we said years ago when we first were considering Act 250. Every time we go through Act 250 issues, people say this is going to wreck the future of our economy. It hasn't happened yet. So I don't see
Yeah,
why it
but-
happened in this case.
The curve might be like this when it could have been like this. And so like, we don't know the impossible, but we probably delayed and slowed growth. I mean, think about the environmental impact, people having to go down to Williston every day from St. Albans to go to Walmart when it took 20 years to build that Walmart in St. Albans. And now we have a downtown revitalization. We have all this and people keep their money in our community.
So
Probably actually been better. Act 250 delayed that for 20 years.
So can I, it's interesting you bring up St. Albans, because what's the guy, Charlie, the old Charlie and Ernie? Charlie,
Oh,
Papilla.
Papilla,
Ernie's
Papilla.
from Snow.
Charlie interviewed me about Act 250 because I was part of this roadshow a few years ago. I didn't know very much about it and I learned a lot. So Charlie interviewed me with the guy that developed St. Albans Walmart. And he was clearly the anti-Act 250 and I was the pro-Act 250 voice in this video. And what came out of that was, yes, a lot of delay. And that had a lot to do with Walmart as a lightning rod in a lot of ways. But the developer, I'm forgetting his name,
Jeff Davis.
Yeah,
Jeff, acknowledged that the process had him invest all manner of money in the downtown revitalization. And so I was like,
Yeah, but that
That's
was
interesting.
borderline extortion.
well, look, he didn't lose money on the Walmart creation. So,
No, but-
at the end of the day, the public process is also what we roundly trumpet as a very successful part of probably the beginning part of St. Albans downtown revitalization. It was fascinating to me to sit there and listen to the complaints and celebrating the downtown.
Jeff Davis just
And-
sold all those buildings at a huge loss.
Okay,
Because there
well,
was, he just did last week, you can read the real estate transfer tax. Like, he was literally required by the city of St. Albans to buy buildings before they would drop their appeal to it. Some developers are gonna walk out on that. He did it and he made
it's just
money,
an
but that,
interesting case that the process had a real community benefit and I mean, if you're gonna argue that he lost money making Walmart, I don't know what to say, but clearly absent that process, you don't have that investment in downtown. Maybe that's okay. I thought it was positive.
But St. Albans was doing pretty well these days.
I think St. Albans is doing fine, but it's $60 million of TIF money, but what the big driver is, Walmart keeps people in town. So they go out to dinner in town. When I was a kid, you went to Burlington to get anything, and then you also caught a movie and dinner while you were there. Walmart keeps people in and it draws people from other parts of Franklin County into St. Albans and keeps them there. Same with these jobs, these airports. To me, this cost will either kill a project or stop a project from happening or delay a project. When instead of sending 10,000 people to Chittenden County from work in Franklin County, we could keep them in Franklin County or in Rutland County or in other counties. These are no brainers for we want this future economy, especially when it comes to like a beta technologies. They're building electric airplanes. Like, this is what we want for climate change. These are good paying green jobs that will move people here. Yet we'll sit there and say, yeah, we want you to pay $350,000 to offset sand in Highgate.
Yeah, no, it's not, I think it's important to acknowledge that some of it's frustrating and negative, and it's not all negative and frustrating, and that there are good outcomes that result. And I'm just it was just an interesting thing that I had not ever understood about the Walmart.
have you been to St. J in the last 10
I
years?
drove through it the other day.
Looks really going well, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, it's
They're starting
better
to
than it-
get.
well, it looks better downtown, and I only just chased Route 2 through there.
Did you go to?
It looks a lot better
Littleton?
than it looked 10 years ago.
Did you go to
Don't you think?
Littleton? Did you go all the way over?
Yeah, but it's.
Did you go down there Main Street? or we
No,
are,
I actually
so-
went north from there.
Well, 20 years ago or 5 years ago, St. J wouldn't let Walmart in St. J. They were gonna protect their downtown.
Yeah.
And they went 18 miles away and there everything went with them.
Yeah,
St. J is starving to death and Littleton is booming.
Well, and here's the argument.
I mean, you gotta have both. You
So,
gotta have
but here's-
some controls, but not too many, you know.
And here's the argument, we're competing with like Plattsburgh. Plattsburgh is, so it's been in the public news. So we have this $200 million facility Beta's looking to build in South Burlington. They're also looking at our old Energizer plant, which has been empty for 6-7 years. Plattsburgh is literally throwing $6 million and we'll get the building up without permitting at Beta. The DRB slowing them down in South Burlington could cost Franklin County those jobs because they could just all end up in Plattsburgh where they're throwing money at. We'll never be able to compete with that money. I get that, I'm not asking us to, but these permitting hurdles
Yeah.
make that money much more attractive. When you can get the money and avoid the permitting hurdle, why would you stay here? Why?
I don't know what New York is, but
I mean, they just have gobs of money.
Right.
The scale is.
But we can't compete with the money, but we can compete with the regulation.
They're,
so Ellen,
thanks for the candy.
yeah. I guess, yeah, you
So
got,
that's the end of the bill. I can talk more at some point about the ag mitigation process if you'd like.
Yeah.
But we hit all the major points of the bill.
yeah, well, we'll get you back when we dig into this a little further. Maybe they'll send a bill over from the House. But we'll get you back, when we get back to work on. Yeah, and, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So,
Nice to see you.
okay, tomorrow we got that field trip. to
Yeah.
handle.
How are we meeting there at 9?
Pardon?
We're meeting there at 9.
No,
We're
we're
leaving here.
Here,
here at
Oh, we're leaving here at 9. Okay.
yeah.
And I didn't realize it's also what the House committee is, right? So I would rather not go, to tell you the truth. I mean, nothing personal about the House committee, but in terms of
So for.
navigating that kind of a
my
group.
car, if you
All right.
want.
Sure.
I'll jump in with you.
Yeah, so we'll
I can
meet,
jump with you or take my
we'll
truck.
meet here like right at 9.